Hi, welcome to the Hurricane Utah Adult Religion class, sponsored by the Hurricane Utah North Stake of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'm Mike Parker, and since 2008, it's been my privilege to be the instructor for this class. The Hurricane Utah Adult Religion class meets on Thursday evenings between September and May to discuss the scriptures, teachings, and history of the restored Church of Jesus Christ. If you live in or are visiting the Hurricane St. George area, I'd love to have you join us. Time and location are available on the class website. There's a link to that in the show notes just below this video. Also on the class website, you can download my notes, which includes footnotes documenting my sources, this PowerPoint presentation, and handouts that I distribute in class. Please note that this YouTube channel and the class website are not official sites of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Hurricane Utah North Stake, or any other church unit or department. I alone am responsible for the content on these sites. What you're about to see is a recording of my notes for one of the lessons. If you enjoy this video, please click the like button and share it with a friend. And please feel free to subscribe if you'd like to be notified when new content is posted to this channel. My friends, the gospel of Jesus Christ is true. Joseph Smith was a prophet of God, and the authority and keys that he held are now vested in the First Presidency and Quorum of the 12 Apostles of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And, most importantly, Jesus Christ is the Son of God and the Savior of the world. I hope you enjoy this lesson. In this lesson, we're going to focus on a single section of the Doctrine and Covenants, Section 89, the Word of Wisdom. In September 1832, Joseph Smith and his family moved from Hiram, Ohio, into the living quarters above Newell K. Whitney's store in Kirtland. One of the small upstairs rooms of the store was converted into a schoolroom where the School of the Prophets would meet. The School of the Prophets was organized by commandment of the Lord at Kirtland, Ohio. Its purpose was to instruct selected priesthood holders on scripture and doctrine, as well as on secular topics. The school held its first meeting on the 23rd of January, 1833. As we discussed in our last lesson, members were initiated into the school by the ordinance of the washing of feet. At the start of each meeting, they greeted each other with a formal covenant salutation. The Word of Wisdom emerged from the School of the Prophets. It was received on the 27th of February, 1833, 1 month after the school had been organized. Brigham Young later recalled, quote, "I think I am as well acquainted with the circumstances which led to the giving of the word of wisdom as any man in the church, although I was not present at the time to witness them. The first school of the prophets was held in a small room situated over the prophet Joseph's kitchen, in a house which belonged to Bishop Whitney. The brethren came to that place for hundreds of miles to attend school in a little room probably no larger than 11 by 14 feet. When they assembled together in this room after breakfast, the first they did was to light their pipes, and while smoking, talk about the great things of the kingdom, and spit all over the room. And as soon as the pipe was out of their mouths, a large chew of tobacco would then be taken. Often, when the prophet entered the room to give the school instructions, he would find himself in a cloud of tobacco smoke. This, and the complaints of his wife at having to clean so filthy a floor, made the prophet think upon the matter, and he inquired of the Lord relating to the conduct of the elders in using tobacco, and the revelation known as the Word of Wisdom was the result of his inquiry." Unquote. In order to better understand the Word of Wisdom, it's helpful to understand the state of health science in 1833. The general understanding of disease at that time was quite different than it is today. The classical view, which was on its way out at that time, was the ancient Greek and Roman belief in humors, or chemical systems regulating human behavior. According to this theory, a balance of these four humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, was necessary for good health. Pain and illness were caused by a deficit or excess of one of these elements. If a person became sick, the treatment sought to purge the excess humor or otherwise try to restore the balance of the four humors. Heroic medicine, advocated by Benjamin Rush, employed aggressive and often invasive treatments to this end. Practitioners of heroic medicine used methods such as bloodletting, induced vomiting, and the administration of toxic substances like mercury and antimony. These treatments were intended to purge the body of disease, but they often caused more harm than good. By the 1830s, a growing number of Americans, especially those who had firsthand experience with the failures of heroic medicine, were beginning to reject it as ineffective and dangerous. The leading alternative view at the time was a new movement founded by Samuel Thomson, an amateur botanist and herbalist. Thomsonian medicine maintained that disease came about because of an abnormally high or low internal body temperature caused by overstimulation or understimulation. According to Thomson, quote, "Heat is life, cold is death. Anything that increased vital heat was beneficial, and anything that impeded circulation and vital force was dangerous," unquote. Thomson emphasized the use of herbal remedies and natural treatments for disease. His system involved the use of specific herbs which induced vomiting, accompanied by a vapor or steam bath. These treatments were designed to expel or sweat out impurities and detoxify the body. One thing that practitioners of heroic and Thomsonian medicine agreed upon was that disease could be prevented by avoiding foods and beverages that were too stimulating. One historian explained, quote, "It was reasonably enough assumed that the ill-advised consumption of stimulants by even those in good health could lead to disease. Immoderate use of even mildly stimulating foods and drinks was likely to result in symptoms ranging from indigestion to nervous debility, and this was especially so in the many individuals of delicate, nervous, or sanguine temperament. Young children, pregnant women, and those already ill with fevers or other inflammations were particularly at risk, as were those whose jobs were largely sedentary, such as students. The more powerful stimulants, unless prescribed for purely medicinal purposes, pose substantial risks to everyone who consumed them. On these general points, nearly all orthodox physicians were in agreement. They differed only on the degree of stimulation associated with such items as ardent spirits, wine, beer, etc., coffee, tea, meat, mustard, pepper, and other spices. Led by such non-physician crusaders as Sylvester Graham, inventor of the graham cracker, which was intended as a food that minimized pleasure and stimulation, health reformers began crusades against the abuse, and more often against any use, of such stimulants as coffee and tea, all meats, ultimately all condiments and spices, and sex. Graham also barred white bread and salt." Unquote. Tobacco had long been touted for its medicinal uses, but by the 1830s, this idea was beginning to fall into disfavor. Its habitual use was considered problematic, although experts did not consider it as stimulating as coffee, tea, or alcohol. Excessive use of alcoholic drinks was considered especially hazardous to the health of those with weak constitutions. Some physicians recommended complete abstinence. The general belief of the time supported the Word of Wisdom's call for complete abstinence from alcohol, and a national temperance movement was on the rise. From a few thousand advocates late in the 1820s, the American Temperance Society had grown to well over 1 million members by 1834. Estimated per capita alcohol consumption plummeted during this decade to less than a third its previous level. Drinks that were too hot, such as coffee, tea, soup, or even water, were considered overstimulating. Excessively low temperatures were also believed to be harmful. One medical authority claimed that, quote, "a copious draught of cold water taken in a state of perspiration and fatigue is often instantly fatal," unquote. It was commonly held that the appropriate temperature of food and drink was no more than a little above or below the heat of blood. Red meat was also considered more stimulating than chicken or fish, and all of those were more stimulating than fruits and vegetables. Average life expectancy in 1830 America is estimated at just 35 years, less than half of what it is today. By 1900, it had risen to just under 50. The problem, of course, was that no one knew about germs, bacterial, viral, or otherwise, until the late 19th century. In America, at least, most illness was still tied to miasma or other atmospheric conditions. Many diseases, such as cholera, dysentery, infant diarrhea, and typhoid fever, spread rapidly due to the lack of clean drinking water and adequate waste disposal. Ironically, drinking alcohol, coffee, and tea was actually safer in the 19th century than drinking water. The word of wisdom was, therefore, mostly in line with prevailing medical beliefs of its day. The miracle of the word of wisdom is that it got the right things right, prohibiting only those substances that have since been demonstrated to be harmful and ignoring much of the folk medicine of the 1830s. With that historical background, let's examine the texts of the word of wisdom. Section 89 can be outlined this way. Verses 1 through 3 are the prologue. Verses 4 through 9 contain proscriptions, things that are advised against. Verses 10 through 17 list prescriptions, things that are encouraged. Verses 18 through 21 are promises made to those who live the word of wisdom. We'll begin with the prologue. D&C 89, verses 1 through 3. Quote, "A word of wisdom for the benefit of the council of high priests assembled in Kirtland, and the church, and also the saints in Zion, to be sent greeting, not by commandment or constraint, but by revelation and the word of wisdom, showing forth the order and will of God in the temporal salvation of all saints in the last days, given for a principle with promise, adapted to the capacity of the weak and the weakest of all saints, who are or can be called saints." Unquote. The introduction identifies this section as a word of wisdom to be sent by revelation and the word of wisdom. The word of wisdom is a spiritual gift. There are many words of wisdom mentioned in the scriptures. We capitalize the term the word of wisdom to distinguish this revelation from other words of wisdom. This revelation was specifically directed to three groups of people. First, to the council of high priests assembled in Kirtland, meaning the members of the school of the prophets. Second, to the church, referring to the church in Kirtland. Third, to the saints in Zion, Jackson County, Missouri. This revelation was sent not by commandment or constraint. The word of wisdom was initially understood as a call for moderation, not abstinence. One historian explained, quote, "In the 1830s, the word of wisdom was preached and followed with very little consistency. Some members clearly viewed compliance with these words of wisdom as obligatory for good standing within the church, while others unmistakably rejected this notion. While consumption of strong drink occasionally turned up among grounds for excommunication, other proscribed items remained widely, if temperately, used throughout the 1830s. By the 1840s, the more tolerant attitude had been adopted by the church at large. Nauvoo liberalized its liquor control laws, and Joseph Smith demonstrated by words and action that his personal approach was one of moderation. The latter years of the 1840s saw a further relaxation of any practical proscription implied in the Latter-day Saint Health Code, and Mormon pioneers who could afford it included tea, coffee, and alcohol among the staples they carried west. The Mormon Nauvoo Neighbor newspaper, in fact, specifically recommended that each family take a pound of tea, a pound of coffee, and a gallon of alcohol. By 1851, adherence to the word of wisdom had been eroded even further by frontier conditions, and compliance may well have been at its 19th century low point. Unquote. There are numerous recorded instances in the early history of the restored church in which Latter-day Saint members and leaders drank wine for social reasons. Joseph Smith himself operated a bar in Nauvoo, and he and his companions in the Carthage jail drank from a bottle of wine shortly before the attack that took the lives of Joseph and his brother Hiram. The first attempt to make observance of the word of wisdom a commandment took place at General Conference in September 1851. The minutes of the meeting record, quote, President Brigham Young rose to put the motion and called on all the sisters who will leave off the use of tea, coffee, etc., to manifest it by raising the right hand. Seconded and carried. And then put the following motion, and then calling on all the boys who were under 90 years of age who would covenant to leave off the use of tobacco, whiskey, and all things mentioned in the word of wisdom to manifest it in the same manner, which was carried unanimously. Unquote. The word of wisdom, however, continued to remain a high standard that the saints were encouraged to live as much as possible, but was not enforced as a requirement for full fellowship in the church. Due to the enduring problem of the use of chewing tobacco by the saints, Brigham Young made these remarks in General Conference in 1870, quote, On Sunday, after meeting, going through the gallery of the tabernacle, which had been occupied by those claiming, no doubt, to be gentlemen and perhaps brethren, you might have supposed that cattle had been standing around there and dropping their nuisances. Here and there were great quids of tobacco, and places a foot or 2 feet square smeared with tobacco juice. I wish the doorkeepers, when in the future they observe any persons besmearing the seats and floor in this way, to request them to leave the house, and if they refuse and will not stop spitting about and besmearing their neighbors, just take them and lead them out carefully and kindly. It is an imposition for those claiming to be gentlemen to spit tobacco juice for ladies to draw their clothes through and besmear them, or to leave their dirt in the house. We request all addicted to this practice to omit it while in this house. Elders of Israel, if you must chew tobacco, omit it while in meeting, and when you leave, you can take a double portion if you wish to. Unquote. In the late 19th century, some church leaders regretfully confessed to using substances forbidden by the word of wisdom, while still encouraging members of the church to stop the use of tobacco, alcohol, coffee, and tea. Adherence to the word of wisdom as a requirement of full fellowship began during the administration of President Joseph F. Smith, and complete abstinence from tobacco, alcohol, coffee, and tea became a requirement to qualify for a temple recommend under President Heber J. Grant in the 1920s. It has remained a requirement for a temple recommend since that time, with the spirit of the law extended to also refraining from recreational, habitual, or illegal drug use. The word of wisdom is a principle with promise. It's a word to the wise, so to speak. Those who are wise enough to practice it will receive the blessings it promises. The principle is found in verses 4 through 17. The promise is in verses 18 through 21. The next section of the Revelation contains proscriptions, substances that should be avoided. Dean C. 89, verses 4 through 9. Quote, Behold, verily, thus saith the Lord unto you, in consequence of evils and designs which do and will exist in the hearts of conspiring men in the last days, I have warned you and forewarned you by giving unto you this word of wisdom by revelation, that inasmuch as any man drinketh wine or strong drink among you, behold, it is not good, neither meat in the sight of your Father, only in assembling yourselves together to offer up your sacraments before him. And behold, this should be wine, yea, pure wine of the grape of the vine, of your own make. And again, strong drinks are not for the belly, but for the washing of your bodies. And again, tobacco is not for the body, neither for the belly, and is not good for man, but is an herb for bruises and all sick cattle, to be used with judgment and skill. And again, hot drinks are not for the body or belly. Unquote. This portion of the Revelation begins with the reason why these substances are prohibited, in consequence of evils and designs which do and will exist in the hearts of conspiring men in the last days. The word of wisdom is a law specifically given to Latter-day Saints. It is not a universal or natural law that applies to all mankind in all ages. It does not apply to non-Latter-day Saints. It did not apply to the Lord's covenant people in previous ages. Therefore, our non-Mormon neighbors are not sinning when they smoke or drink, and ancient prophets who drank alcohol did not sin. What conspiracies exist in the last days concerning the products prohibited and encouraged by the word of wisdom? The denial or suppression of the knowledge of the dangers of tobacco use by tobacco firms is one primary example. Another is the marketing of tobacco and alcohol to minors. Add to that alcohol advertisements that show people mingling and having fun while overlooking the serious social consequences of alcohol, including deaths and injuries from drunk driving and violence and abuse caused by those who drink too much. Also problematic is the marketing of junk food, particularly to children. Unlike the ancient world, today we have distillation, cigarette rolling machines, and industrial production and distribution of substances that make it easier for us to obtain and abuse them. Some individuals and organizations are perfectly willing to convert our health, and even our lives, into their money. The word of wisdom prohibits the drinking of wine or strong drink. Strong drink refers to distilled beverages that have a higher alcohol content than fermented beverages. These include spirits and liqueurs such as brandy, gin, rum, vodka, and whiskey. Notice that strong drinks are contrasted in verse 17 with mild drinks made from barley. In the 1830s, mild drinks referred to lightly fermented drinks with low alcohol content, like cider and malt liquor. Increased compliance with the word of wisdom in the early 20th century prohibited all alcoholic beverages, whether strong or mild, distilled or fermented. The technical wording of the original revelation was replaced by additional revelation to more recent prophets. The revelation does, however, encourage the use of strong drinks for the washing of your bodies. Alcohol has long been known for its disinfectant properties. Wine is acceptable for use in the sacrament if it is pure wine of the grape of the vine of your own make. This did not forbid the use of fermented wine, only tainted wine or wine made by non-Latter-day Saints. This passage is similar to the commandment in D&C 27 verse 4 to partake of no wine except it is made new among you, a reference to making sure that the sacramental wine was pure and not tampered with by the enemies of the church. Regarding tobacco use, as I mentioned before, by the 1830s, smoking and chewing tobacco were beginning to be identified as health hazards, although for the wrong reasons. The invention of the automated cigarette-making machine in the late 19th century made it possible to mass-produce cigarettes at low cost. Smoking cigarettes soon became fashionable and elegant. In 1912, American Isaac Adler was the first physician to suspect that smoking was connected to lung cancer. Before World War I, lung cancer was a rare disease. After the war, the rise in the popularity of cigarette smoking made lung cancer a sudden epidemic. Statistical evidence of a link between lung cancer and tobacco began to emerge in the 1930s. In 1950, British epidemiologists Richard Dahl and Bradford Hill published a landmark study in the British Medical Journal that demonstrated a close link between smoking and lung cancer. 4 years later, they published a study of the smoking habits of 40,000 doctors, which confirmed their earlier findings. Based on their research, the British government advised that smoking and lung cancer rates were related. In 1964, the U.S. Surgeon General's report, Smoking and Health, found that smoking is linked to chronic bronchitis, emphysema, heart disease, and lung cancer. The report led to the ban on certain types of tobacco advertising and required a warning label to be printed on all tobacco products. Although 1 in 9 Americans still smoke cigarettes, smoking rates today are a quarter of what they were 60 years ago. Tobacco has long been used as an herbal remedy, and the Word of Wisdom supports that application. According to research conducted at Brigham Young University, bruises treated with tobacco juice heal 20% faster than untreated bruises. Though the term hot drinks might seem vague today, it was understood by the saints in Joseph Smith's time to mean coffee and tea, and it has consistently been defined that way since then. This prescription includes products made from the coffee bean or tea leaf, whether ingested hot or cold. Herbal teas, which are steeped like tea but not made from the tea leaf, do not fit this definition. Some Latter-day Saints have speculated that the chemical stimulant caffeine might be the cause of the prohibition against coffee and tea, and have therefore avoided all caffeinated drinks and substances. This is not the policy of the Church, however. If caffeine were the prohibited substance in coffee, then drinking decaffeinated coffee would be acceptable, but it isn't. The First Presidency issued the following statement in 1972, quote, "With reference to cola drinks, the Church has never officially taken a position on this matter, but the leaders of the Church have advised, and we do now specifically advise, against the use of any drink containing harmful, habit-forming drugs under circumstances that would result in acquiring the habit. Any beverage that contains ingredients harmful to the body should be avoided." Unquote. Spencer W. Kimball counseled, quote, "I never drink any of the cola drinks, and my personal hope would be that no one would. However, they are not included in the Word of Wisdom in its technical application." I quote from a letter from the Secretary to the First Presidency. "But the spirit of the Word of Wisdom would be violated by the drinking or eating of anything that contained a habit-forming drug." With reference to the cola drinks, the Church has never officially taken any attitude on this, but I personally do not put them in the class as with the tea and coffee, because the Lord specifically mentioned tea and coffee." Unquote. In a correction to a 2012 documentary about Latter-day Saints, the Church's Public Relations Department issued this statement, quote, "Despite what was reported, the Church Revelation, spelling out health practices, Doctrine and Covenants 89, does not mention the use of caffeine. The Church's health guidelines prohibit alcoholic drinks, smoking or chewing of tobacco, and hot drinks, taught by church leaders to refer specifically to tea and coffee." In August 2019, church leaders continue to broaden the Word of Wisdom by clarifying that several substances are prohibited by it, quote, "including vaping or e-cigarettes, green tea, and coffee-based products." They also cautioned that substances such as marijuana and opioids should be used only for medicinal purposes as prescribed by a competent physician. Unquote. After giving those prescriptions, the Revelation includes a series of prescriptions, practices that it advises we follow. D&C 89, verses 10 through 17, quote, "And again, verily I say unto you, all wholesome herbs God hath ordained for the constitution, nature, and use of man, every herb in the season thereof, and every fruit in the season thereof, all these to be used with prudence and thanksgiving. Yea, flesh also of beasts and of the fowls of the air, I the Lord have ordained for the use of man with thanksgiving. Nevertheless, they are to be used sparingly. And it is pleasing unto me that they should not be used only in times of winter, or of cold, or famine. All grain is ordained for the use of man and of beasts, to be the staff of life, not only for man, but for the beasts of the field, and the fowls of heaven, and all wild animals that run or creep on the earth. And these hath God made for the use of man only in times of famine and excess of hunger. All grain is good for the use of man, as also the fruit of the vine, that which yieldeth fruit, whether in the ground or above the ground. Nevertheless, wheat for man, and corn for the ox, and oats for the horse, and rye for the fowls and for swine, and for all beasts of the field, and barley for all useful animals, and for mild drinks, as also other grain." To avoid misunderstanding, let's define what all wholesome herbs meant to Joseph Smith and his contemporaries. Noah Webster's 1828 American English Dictionary defined herb as, quote, a plant or vegetable with a soft or succulent stalk or stem, which dies to the root every year, and is thus distinguished from a tree and a shrub, which have ligneous or hard woody stem. The word herb comprehends all the grasses and numerous plants used for culinary purposes, unquote. Some Latter-day Saints have misunderstood or distorted the intended meaning of herb in the Word of Wisdom. The Word of Wisdom should not be understood as an endorsement of herbal or alternative medicine as replacements for mainstream medicine and doctors. The Word of Wisdom does not forbid the use of herbalists and herbal medicines, but neither does it endorse it. The meaning of verses 10 and 11 is that plants were created for the use of human beings and should be used with wisdom and gratitude. Twice before this, Joseph Smith's revelations indicated that animal flesh is ordained for the use of man for food and for raiment. The Word of Wisdom repeated this by declaring it is ordained for the use of man with thanksgiving. Although vegetarianism is acceptable and may be practiced in good health, such a diet is not mandated or endorsed by the Word of Wisdom or anywhere else in Scripture. Rather, the Word of Wisdom counsels us that meat is to be used sparingly in a balanced diet that also includes vegetables, fruits, and grains. The term sparingly must be understood within the context of the standards and norms of American frontier life in the 1830s. At that time, meat was often considered the staff of life, and the diets of many Americans consisted largely or mostly of animal flesh. The Word of Wisdom established whole grains as the staff of life, that is, the primary means of sustenance for humans, while allowing the use of meat in moderation. Our misunderstanding of the commandment that meat should not be used only in times of winter has been complicated by the insertion of a comma after the word used. A comma was not in the original reading of the passage. It was added in the 1921 edition of the Doctrine and Covenants. If one removes the comma, the passage reads exactly the opposite of how it does when the comma is present. The insertion of the comma seems to make sense, as it brings verse 13 into agreement with the meaning and intent of verses 12 and 15. Looking at this verse from the perspective of saints living in 1833, spoiled meat can be fatal if eaten, and in former times, meat spoiled more readily in the summer than winter. Modern methods of refrigeration now make it possible to preserve meat in any season. The key word with respect to the use of meat is sparingly. As with other commandments, there are some individuals in the church who take the principles of the Word of Wisdom to extremes. President Joseph F. Smith referred to these extreme interpretations as gospel hobbies. He wrote, quote, "Brethren and sisters, don't have hobbies. Hobbies are dangerous in the Church of Christ. They are dangerous because they give undue prominence to certain principles or ideas to the detriment and dwarfing of others just as important, just as binding, just as saving as the favored doctrines or commandments. We have noticed this difficulty, that saints with hobbies are prone to judge and condemn their brethren and sisters who are not as zealous in the one particular direction of their pet theory as they are. The man with the Word of Wisdom only on his brain is apt to find unmeasured fault with every other member of the church who entertains liberal ideas as to the importance of other doctrines of the gospel." Unquote. Elder Bruce R. McConkie wrote, quote, "Some unstable people become cranks with reference to this law of health. It should be understood that the Word of Wisdom is not the gospel, and the gospel is not the Word of Wisdom. There is no prohibition in Section 89, for instance, as to the eating of white bread, using white flour, white sugar, cocoa, chocolate, eggs, milk, meat, or anything else, except items classified under the headings tea, coffee, tobacco, and liquor." Unquote. The revelation on the Word of Wisdom concludes with a list of promises to those who observe it. D&C 89, verses 18 through 21, quote, "And all saints who remember to keep and do these sayings, walking in obedience to the commandments, shall receive health in their navel and marrow to their bones, and shall find wisdom and great treasures of knowledge, even hidden treasures, and shall run and not be weary, and shall walk and not faint. And I, the Lord, give unto them a promise, that the destroying angel shall pass by them as the children of Israel, and not slay them. Amen." Unquote. The principles given in the word of wisdom must be lived along with walking in obedience to the Lord's other commandments if we wish to receive the promised blessings. Because of this, I suggest that the promises made in these verses do not refer merely to the physical results of healthy living, which are readily available to the wicked as well as the righteous. Elder Harold B. Lee taught, quote, "If you would escape from the devastations when God's judgments descend upon the wicked, as in the days of the children of Israel, you must remember and do what the Lord commands. All saints who remember to keep and do these sayings," meaning keep his great law of health known as the word of wisdom to you Latter-day Saints, "and in addition thereto, walk in obedience to the commandments, which would include honesty, moral purity, together with all the laws of the celestial kingdom. Then the destroying angel shall pass by them as the children of Israel, and not slay them." Unquote. The promise that they shall receive health in their navel and marrow to their bones is a quotation from Proverbs 3, verses 7 through 8, where the same promise was given to those who fear the Lord and depart from evil. The expression is a parallelism. The two parts of the expression convey the same idea with slight modifications. Navel and bones are examples of synecdoche, a figure of speech in which a part is used to represent the whole. In this case, navel represents the outer physical person, while bones represents the inner moral person. The meaning of this promise, therefore, is that the person who is obedient to the Lord's commandments will be both physically strong and morally upright. This revelation is a word of wisdom, and it promises that those who obey it shall find wisdom. Obedience to the word of wisdom is one key to receiving the spiritual gift of wisdom promised in D&C 46, verse 17. The statement that they shall run and not be weary and shall walk and not faint is a quotation from Isaiah 40, verse 31. Like verse 18, this thought is expressed as a parallelism. Many people who strictly obey the word of wisdom are tired when they run. Is this promise only fulfilled some of the time? We need to keep in mind that the promises here are more spiritual in nature than physical. While people who live the word of wisdom will be healthier in general than those who do not, the terms run and walk in verse 20 likely refer to our spiritual struggles and progress in mortality. The final promise, the destroying angel shall pass by them as the children of Israel, is an explicit reference to the Passover promise given to the Israelites in Egypt. The 10th plague the Lord brought upon Egypt was the death of the firstborn male of every household. The Israelites, however, were told to kill a lamb and strike its blood on their doorframes, quote, "And when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and the plague shall not be upon you to destroy you," unquote. Since that time, the people of Israel have observed the Passover feast as a symbol of the covenant with Jehovah, their God. Just as the Passover was a covenant with ancient Israel, the word of wisdom is a covenant with modern Israel, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It is not only, or I would argue even primarily, a law of health. Rather, it's a covenant promise that sets us apart as the Lord's people and reminds us that we are different than the rest of the world. And the word of wisdom has been effective at doing just that. Abstinence from tobacco, alcohol, coffee, and tea is one of the unique practices Latter-day Saints are known for. It sometimes puts us in awkward social circumstances where we must explain or even defend our beliefs and practices. And that is the key point. The health benefits of the word of wisdom are immaterial. There are some practices that the saints avoid, like the moderate use of wine, that have been medically shown to have health benefits. But the Lord's commandments do not need to be backed up by scientific studies for us to honor and obey them. On the contrary, such thinking regarding the word of wisdom can actually hinder rather than help us to be obedient. At any point in time, we could find many different authorities proclaiming the benefits or condemning the harmfulness of various substances. Appealing to or arguing with science undermines the authority of the prophets. It makes observing the word of wisdom a pragmatic, pro-health decision that's dependent on scientific studies, instead of a covenant practice in which we recognize the authority of the word of God. So while I am pleased that there are health benefits to the word of wisdom, I prefer to see it as part of a covenant I have made with God and as a member of the community of saints. That concludes this lesson. If you enjoyed it, please click the thumbs up button and leave a comment below. Please subscribe if you'd like to be notified when new lessons are posted to this channel, and visit www.huarc.org to download these notes and this slideshow. Next week, we're going to discuss Joseph Smith's revelations concerning civil government, secular law, and the practice of war. The reading is Doctrine and Covenants, sections 98 through 99, 102, 106, 108, and 134. See you in the next lesson.